On Christmas Eve 2025, while the city glittered with artificial cheer and piped-in carols echoed through polished lobbies, a black man named David Cole stepped into the Grand Aurora Hotel carrying nothing but a small overnight bag and the quiet dignity of someone used to being underestimated. The marble floors reflecting chandeliers worth more than most homes as staff hurried past him with eyes trained to look through rather than at, and from the very first second, the tension hummed beneath the tinsel because David didn't look like what the front desk expected of wealth on a night reserved for elites and influencers and donors sipping champagne before midnight mass. His coat plain, his shoes clean but modest, his posture calm, and that calm seemed to irritate the receptionist named Lorna, who glanced up and down with a smirk sharpened by years of silent prejudice, asking in a clipped voice if he was lost or looking for the service entrance. A sentence that landed like a slap, and when David replied softly that he had a reservation under Cole, she laughed, a small cruel sound, tapping her keyboard theatrically and announcing loudly enough for nearby guests to hear that there was no such reservation and that this hotel requires valid identification and payment. As if he were trying to sneak warmth from the lobby rather than check into a suite he owned, whispers curling through the line, eyes turning, judgment blooming, and David felt that familiar heat rise in his chest. The memory of a lifetime of moments like this stacking one atop another. But he breathed, because Christmas Eve had taught him patience, because his mother had taught him restraint, because power, real power, did not shout. And so he asked politely for a manager, which only deepened the humiliation as Lorna leaned back and said managers were very busy with real guests. And a security guard drifted closer, hand resting near his radio. Not because of any threat, but because David's presence had been labeled one. And in that moment the music swelled with a choir singing about peace on earth while the lobby vibrated with injustice. And David realized this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a performance, one designed to remind him of where they thought he belonged. And still he did not raise his voice, instead reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone, not to record, not to argue, but to make a single call, a call he had hoped never to need, dialing a number few people knew existed. The private line reserved for owners and auditors and emergency oversight. And as the phone rang, the guard told him he needed to leave or be escorted out, Lorna nodding eagerly, eyes bright with the anticipation of control. And then the call connected and David spoke quietly, stating only his name and the words Christmas Eve incident, Grand Aurora. And hung up, the simplicity of it almost anticlimactic, which made the staff laugh harder, mocking him openly now, one guest even shaking his head as if David were embarrassing himself. And yet something shifted in the air, subtle at first, like a pressure change before a storm, because within 2 minutes the revolving doors spun and a man in a tailored coat entered flanked by two others in dark suits, their expressions tight, scanning the room with practiced precision. And when their eyes landed on David they stopped, and the man in front walked straight to him and said, "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry," loud enough for everyone to hear, and the lobby fell into stunned silence as Lorna's face drained of color, the guard stepping back instinctively, because the man apologizing was the regional compliance director, a figure whose presence meant audits and terminations and headlines, and he explained that David Cole wasn't just a guest, he was the majority shareholder of the Grand Aurora chain, a silent owner who rarely appeared, a man who had built his fortune quietly after years in cybersecurity and risk analysis, a man who had watched patterns of discrimination hide behind polished smiles and had created systems to expose them. And Christmas Eve 2025 was not a coincidence but a test, because David had received anonymous reports about this location, about guests being turned away, humiliated, redirected based on appearance, and tonight he had walked in alone to see the truth with his own eyes. And what he saw confirmed everything, the power in the room flipping instantly like a switch as whispers turned to gasps and phones came out. The compliance director asking Lorna to step away from the desk, his tone calm but final, asking security to stand down, asking witnesses to remain, and then explaining that the call David made triggered a live audit, that every interaction from the last 6 months was already being pulled, every camera reviewed, every complaint cross-referenced, and Lorna tried to speak, to apologize, to say it was a misunderstanding. But the words collapsed under the weight of evidence because the director read aloud 3 prior complaints with dates and descriptions that matched tonight exactly, and guests watched as arrogance unraveled into panic. The guard now staring at the floor realizing he had been used as a tool, and David finally spoke again, his voice steady but edged with hurt, saying he didn't come to ruin anyone's Christmas. He came to confirm whether a place that advertised luxury and inclusion practiced what it preached? And the answer had been clear, and then the director announced immediate termination pending investigation, not just for Lorna but for supervisory staff who ignored patterns, for managers who trained silence, and for corporate executives who buried reports, because justice, real justice, wasn't about one person losing a job. It was about dismantling a system that thrived on humiliation. And as the staff were escorted away, the lobby remained frozen, the decorations suddenly obscene against the seriousness of what had been revealed. And David turned to the guests, many of whom looked ashamed, and said quietly that power doesn't always look like money or titles. Sometimes it looks like the ability to walk away. But tonight he chose to stay, to expose, to make an example so the next person wouldn't have to endure what he had. And later that night, after statements were taken and policies rewritten in real time, David finally checked into his suite, not as a victor savoring revenge, but as a man exhausted by the constant need to prove humanity. Standing at the window watching snow fall over a city that rarely noticed men like him unless they disrupted comfort. And the next morning headlines broke about sweeping reforms across the hotel chain, about firings and apologies and mandatory bias audits, about a Christmas Eve reckoning that reminded an industry it could no longer hide behind chandeliers. And the life lesson echoed far beyond that lobby, because the story wasn't about a black man secretly owning a hotel. It was about the danger of assuming worth based on appearance, about how unchecked power reveals character, and about how dignity, when paired with truth, can dismantle cruelty without ever raising its voice, leaving justice served not with cheers or chaos but with a quiet, undeniable shift that proved once again that those who humiliate others often forget the most important truth of all: you never know who you're standing in front of.